Hi, everybody. I'm Joey Florence, and as you may have already heard, Canadian Abilities Foundation's Power Up program, funded by the RBC Foundation, is designed to help you uncover the hidden job market and find ways to better access opportunities. As part of our ongoing Power Up video series, I'm happy to introduce Joel Dembe. Joel is a former Canadian wheelchair tennis champion and Paralympian. He's represented Canada at the London 2012 Paralympics and won the country's first international medal in wheelchair tennis at the 2015 Toronto Pan American Games, shortly before retiring from sport. He serves on the board of directors for Praxis Spinal Cord Institute, chair of the Patrons Council at the Canadian Abilities Foundation, and is a senior manager at Royal Bank of Canada. Together, we're going to be talking about self-advocacy and empowerment, owning your story. This includes how to speak up with confidence and clarity, how to express our needs, and ask questions, seek accommodations, and build healthy workplace relationships. So, let's get started. So, thank you so much for being here today, Joel.
Great to be here. Thanks, Joey.
Absolutely. So, I wanted to start by really just asking, what does self-advocacy look like in your day-to-day life?
Wow. For me, it means constantly speaking up when you need help, when you have a question, when something doesn't feel right, or you're using it to propel your career. And too often we see, anyone, not just a person with a disability like myself, um, you know, not speak on their behalf, not find their voice. And I think that's sad. I think we all should use our voice to better ourselves and those around us. But from a disability perspective, self-advocacy is super important because when it comes to accommodation and inclusion, uh, you know, sometimes, your manager, your colleagues, human resources, they might not know your individual needs. So that's why self-advocacy is so important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And it's so important to speak up about your needs. And oftentimes I find it's very nerve-wracking. And a question that kind of comes with that is, how do you talk about your needs at work without feeling anxious? Or even if you are feeling anxious, how do you overcome that?
Well, I think first off, I'm a big believer in relationships, being able to trust the people around you because you've established a great rapport. And so when it comes to disclosure, for example, there's some people who don't disclose at all. There's some people who disclose during the job application process. And then there's those who disclose when they're a bit more comfortable in their work environment. And I think that's even more effective because when you disclose, you probably are in a situation where hopefully you feel safe enough to talk about yourself and your needs. But I think if you don't feel supported, if you don't feel like you have a good relationship with your manager, to your coworkers, speaking up on your behalf can be difficult.
Hmm. Yeah. And so for you, for example, can you share a time maybe where you advocated for yourself or felt that you had to and it changed something for the better?
Yeah, I honestly advocate quite a bit. I'm not shy. I learned at a very young age that just because I had a disability did not preclude me from being assertive,
Hmm.
expressing my needs. I think too many of us become, quote unquote, victims of the environment that are around us, and we feel that, the people, the places, they shape the way we live, and I've never had that belief. I believe we can actually change things by self-advocating. And so, I've worked in a corporate environment for many years now, and so things like wheelchair accessible bathrooms, when there's inclement weather and I'm not going to make it into the office, I'm literally going to say those things. I'm also going to, talk about my health and my situation, but I'm not going to make it my entirety and who I am. Like, I think one thing that I see sometimes happen is the only time, you hear from someone, perhaps on your team, or maybe that person has the courage to talk about their needs, and they're only talking about their disability, but they forget to actually just build the relationship in itself.
Yeah.
So, the first thing is establish yourself, speak up in meetings, be known, being like a known commodity, have an element of visibility. And I know everyone's in a different work environment. Sometimes we have remote work environments, hybrid work environments. I'm in the majority of the week in my work environment. And part of the belief that I have and why I believe in in-person interactions is because of those relationships. I believe that if you build enough relationships with those around you, including, of course, those who you directly report into, you're going to have a trust element build organically to get to the point where you would be able to self-disclose. And so, I believe in the power of relationships. I'll repeat that. And I believe it because I think that's the pathway to being more transparent about your needs.
That really, really resonates with me in terms of building those foundational relationships that you can, ask for help when you need it or lean on people when you need it, and the opposite, and they feel that they can do the exact same with you. I think that's such an important part of working. Something that we've talked about in previous meetings or interviews was that asking questions is often a really hard thing to do, and it really sometimes takes us out of our comfort zone and might be intimidating. What are some things that you do to ask questions to stay calm while doing so?
I think if in the context of me asking questions to my manager or to a team, I've always been taught that there's no such thing as like a dumb question. And so sometimes what can be, seen as obvious to some people isn't so obvious. But obviously, when it comes to accommodation and accessibility, in particular, which is obviously the world I come from, being in a wheelchair, asking questions leads to answers. It leads
Hmm.
to like, okay, how can I better effectively do my job if I'm getting answers related to my accessibility questions. I think conversely, if you're a manager and you are hiring someone with a disability, I think questions are important on your end too. Actually, I think getting to know the real you, the real person behind you, and asking questions that maybe don't go too personal, but simply saying, "Is there anything I can do to help? Is there
Hmm.
anything you need?" Keep that open channel. There's no reason you should go weeks without having a meeting with your manager, irrespective of your needs.
Hmm.
You should have a good rapport as a manager, and same if you're a employee, build that rapport with your manager so that you can ask questions without the fear of doing so. So I think that just happens naturally as you build a better relationship with your manager.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that comes to mind too is, that fear or worry sometimes of disclosing your disability. I'm wondering, it might depend the job sometimes, but how do you go about disclosing in terms of in the workplace?
I mean, like, let me just start about disclosure and, talking to many, employees with disabilities that I've known over the years and people who, are prospective employees and students. And let me just say, Joey, the fear is real. The fear of not being hired because of your disability.
Yeah.
And who can blame the folks who have this fear? Because, many of us simply don't see ourselves represented
Hmm.
in the highest levels of society. We're talking board of directors, political figures, CEOs, venture capitalists. I'm not saying there aren't people with disabilities that exist in those realms, but it's not to the extent and certainly not common enough where someone who's a student hasn't seen it done often enough will simply think that their disability is something to be sadly ashamed of. And this is a generational thing where
Hmm.
we feel this disability is a limiting factor. And I've always been about the mindset of workers with disabilities are some of the most loyal, some of the most savvy, adaptive workers you could hire. And so my tactic, and I might have spoiled this earlier, is hey, maybe don't disclose when you first start applying to a job, but disclose once you have it.
Hmm.
Because there's usually, depending on the work setting, a whole workplace accommodation team that can help you and can help you thrive. And so when I think of disclosure and then which leads to accommodation, I think of, hey, are you going to be able to perform at an even higher level at your job? Because what I want to see, Joey, is more folks go up the corporate ladder or the political ladder or the nonprofit ladder. I want to see more
Yeah.
leaders,
Yeah.
and that can only happen if you're thriving in your career, if you're thriving in your
Absolutely.
day-to-day task, and if you're not getting the right accommodation, whether it's adaptive software or voice adaptive software, and certainly now there's a million pieces of accessible technology that uh, most workplaces have at their disposal that can help you do your job in even better ways. So yeah,
Mhm.
disclose, because the ultimate goal is to excel in your career.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And giving everybody the ability to will help everyone. Like
Yes.
I totally agree with you, Joel. It really brings to mind a question that I kind of like to ask near the end of the interviews, which is, what's one thing you would want to tell your younger self about self-advocacy? It's a big question, so answer it as you will.
Well, okay, I obviously know I'm a former athlete, so I would usually take an adversarial, approach to most things. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna show them. I'm gonna exactly like you would feel like asking would be almost like a tennis match. But in reality, you got to work with people. You got to
Hmm.
work with people. You have to educate people who might not know anything about disability. Can it get exhausting? 100%. But what you're doing is creating the conditions, at your work that make it easier for you to build a network, which is super important, as you know, Joey. But also, again, have the courage to ask these questions. So if I could tell my younger self anything, it would be breathe, slow down. Not everything is a battle, and work within the system. There's practices at place in most workplaces that are terrific. At RBC, I can say we have a great workplace accommodation team. We also have an employee resource group for persons with disabilities too. So join the ERGs in your workplace early on, and meet other people with disabilities that you work with, because I think you're going to be able to trade stories and feel much more at home. Don't feel like
Hmm.
you're in this alone, because you're not
Hmm.
alone. Whether you have a visible disability or an invisible disability, there are many, many others like you. And I can see there's been a massive trend upward in seeing more people with disabilities become leaders. And who knows, maybe you can be one of them next time.
Amazing. Amazing. Joel, thank you so much. It is so amazing hearing from you. We're so thankful. We are so thankful, and it's a pleasure to chat with you. Is there anything that you would want to leave everybody watching this video with?
Yeah, maybe one final tip is to build your brand. I mentioned, we talked about having the courage to ask questions and to build relationships. The other side of it is, who are you? What makes you interesting? And it shouldn't just be your disability. Who are you? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? Make sure that you're all of those things when it comes to when people think about you. You're not just your disability. Remember that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Joel.
Thanks.